everyone. We are coming to you today from Geisinger's Henry Hood Center for Health and Research to celebrate National DNA Day. April 25th, as you may know, commemorates the successful completion of the Human Genome Project in 2003. So we're actually celebrating a 15th anniversary today. But the day is also meant to bring awareness of genetic risk factors that are really important to your health. So the goal today to offer you an opportunity to learn more about the latest advances in genomic research and explore how those advances can impact your life. You know, the world of genomics is changing fast. It's exciting. And there are lots of opportunities popping up. And we have 4 members of our Geisinger genetics team with us today to talk about careers in this exciting field. So I want to introduce to you now our panelists today. To my far left is Gabrielle Szymanski. She is a genomic medicine assistant. To her right is Dr. Gary Bellis. He is a Geisinger physician. Back in the corner is Dr. Mark Williams. He is director of Geisinger's Genomic Medicine Institute. And right next to Dr. Williams is Dr. Krista Martin, and she is director of Geisinger's Autism and Developmental Medicine Institute. That's ADMI for short. Okay, and I'm Marisa Burke, and I'm going to be your host for today's discussion. Thank you all for being here today. Gabrielle, I'm going to begin with you, and we want to hear from all 4 on this question. How did you get started with your career in genetics?
Yeah, so for me, I did my undergraduate work at Penn State, and I was actually in a course in a genetics class, and my professor had brought up genetic counseling, and he, at the time, didn't really know what it was. He had researched it a little bit himself, but for me, it was special, and from that moment on, I became more interested in the field. And I applied for a consenter job here at Geisinger, and then shortly after I consented for a little bit and then became a genomic medicine assistant. So for me, still in the process of becoming a genetic counselor, but that is what I plan to do.
Can you share a little bit with what your next move might be? Because we were talking about it before today's discussion.
Yes, so this week.
The master's program.
Yes, yeah, so genetic counseling is a 2-year master's program. Most programs require a bachelor's degree at first, and then hopefully you'll go on to pursue the 2-year master's, or bachelor's at first and then master's.
Terrific, terrific. Okay, Dr. Bellis, you're up.
Okay. Well, how much time do we have here? So I was born in 1953, which was the year that Watson and Crick discovered the double helix. So I figured I was kind of destined to become a geneticist, from that regard. But I was always, interested in science and, in biology in high school. And I went to college thinking I was going to go into medicine. But, that was a time in the 70s when there were a lot of new discoveries kind of coming out in biology, learning about, that the genes were not just, strings of DNA, they were split up into exons and introns. And when I graduated from high school, I ended up applying to graduate school and getting a degree in molecular biology. And going through that, I kind of got steered back to medicine and in pediatrics. And I just found that, all of the interesting cases, had to do with genetics. So it just kind of, evolved. There was, fellowships in medical genetics, and I just explored that and found, that was a niche. And it's been, enjoyable ever since there. I've done, bench research, I've done clinical research, and I take care of patients, and it's all fun.
Wonderful. Okay, Dr. Williams, we're going to ask you the same thing. How did you get started in your career in genetics?
A little atypically. It started when I married my wife almost 40 years ago. She was a genetic counselor. I was in medical school, and I was going to become some type of a primary care doctor, ultimately became a pediatrician, but really didn't have any knowledge at all about genetics. And so I went and did my general pediatrics residency and practiced pediatrics. But as husbands can it sometimes takes us a little while to undergo the consciousness raising that is necessary. But as I saw what she was doing, and then much as Gary had said, the interesting cases, the ones that were really attracting me in pediatrics, were the genetics cases. And so after about 10 years of general pediatric practice, I went back and did a fellowship in medical genetics, and then really started, again, as a clinician geneticist, and ultimately became interested in other aspects of healthcare delivery. And there was really no way to plan how I ended up where I am, just kind of a productive synthesis of attention deficit disorder and obsessive compulsive disorder, and an interest in science and genetics. It's a thrilling field, and for somebody that wants to be a perpetual student, there's just no better opportunity.
Dr. Martin.
Well, so I grew up with two parents who were both in healthcare and science. So I always wanted to do something in science, but I fell in love with genetics when I was interviewing for college. And it was the first time I really heard about the field of human genetics, and I stuck with it ever since. So I did my bachelor's in developmental biology and genetics, and then I did my PhD in human genetics. And then, I sort of love the combination of working in a lab, but also doing clinical work. So I went and did my board fellowship in clinical laboratory genetics. So I got that training in order to be able to run a clinical genetics laboratory and be able to interpret the information of what a genetic disease is based on laboratory testing, and relaying that, working with physicians like Mark and Gary and genetic counselors to relay that information back to patients. So I feel like it's sort of the best of both worlds, that it still lets me do laboratory-based testing, but I also get to see the clinical side. And then, also the research that I'm involved in around autism and other developmental disorders has allowed me to broaden my interests into pursuing research focused on identifying more and more genetic causes of autism, and then how we might be able to ultimately treat those.
Dr. Williams, you said it's the thrill. It's a thrilling field. What's the thrill?
There's always something new. It really is. There's so little that we know that practically anybody that can contribute to the field. So when I first started in genetics, I was practicing in a clinic in Wisconsin. I was the only geneticist, all by myself. And I would see these interesting patients, and I would be able to collaborate with individuals across the country, or in some cases internationally, to say, there's something really interesting going on here. Can you help me sort it out? And so even as a solo practice clinical geneticist with no background in research whatsoever, I was able to contribute to the discovery of new genes and gene disease associations. And that was the thing that really kind of got me interested in more of the research aspects of that. And then the whole idea of, well, how do we actually deliver genetic care into healthcare, which is more of a healthcare services and economics type of thing. And eventually, how do we use electronic health records and computers to manage all the data? So over the course of time, I became boarded in clinical informatics, which of course didn't exist when I was in medical school. Not that genetics existed when I was in medical school, at least as a specialty. So all of these opportunities to do new things and to synthesize different ways to be able to manage the information, ultimately to achieve the goal of improving the health of patients.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, I want to ask a question to all of you. I want all of you to answer this. In your opinion, what has been the biggest impact that DNA has had on the region? Dr. Williams, you can begin.
Well, that's a really intriguing question. At a fundamental biological level, of course, the region wouldn't be here without DNA, since all of us, every animate thing, plant, animal, whatever, has DNA at its core. So you could really go back right to the beginning of time and say, okay, DNA was essential for this region to be here in the first place. But I think the question you were asking was probably a little bit more focused than that. And I think the opportunity that this has presented to the region is one of leadership. So Geisinger has been a leader in healthcare delivery for, a century. The vision of Abigail Geisinger over 100 years ago to say, we need a clinic. I want it to be the best, bringing individuals from the Mayo Clinic to set it up, to make it one of the highest performing healthcare systems in the country was really a critical piece. And what it did was it laid the groundwork then for us to be able to build onto that in a number of different areas, not just genetics. But genetics has been the most recent thing. And so when I came just over 6 years ago, there had been a commitment from the leadership in the strategic planning to say we are going to focus on genetics and genomics as a strategic initiative because we think our population here is interested in it. We think that we have some unique opportunities because our folks tend to live with us, work with us, stay with us over the course of their lifetime, meaning we have more ability to use this information than places where there's much more transience of the population. So let's figure out how to do it. And I think what's happened as a result is the recognition of Geisinger as a health system that really is at the forefront of doing it. And I think that, you know, the opportunity to have Central Pennsylvania in the national and international spotlight about, hey, these people know how to do this and really how to use this information has been incredible for the region. I think it's brought in a lot of business and technology and interest in STEM and all of those things, which I think in the long run is going to be good as we transition out of sort of the traditional economic entities that have run Central Pennsylvania.
Dr. Morgan?
Yeah, I'll just follow to Mark. You know, one of the projects that we've started at Geisinger, which is really being used as a model across the nation, across the world, is MyCode. And that's the project where we're asking all of our families and patients, you know, to participate in a study to look at one's DNA. And it's a research study now, but we fully visualize that what we're doing as part of research now will be part of clinical care soon. We're identifying individuals who have changes in breast cancer genes and other cancers and cardiac or cardiomyopathy genes, and being able to give them life-saving information for early detection of those disorders. And we're finding out a lot about that through research, but our goal is to make that part of everybody's everyday clinical care.
Gabrielle?
Thank you. For me, I think that just going off of what she had mentioned, definitely when I started here with Geisinger, consenting for the MyCode project has been a very impactful thing, not only for me, but the different patients that I've consented. I'm in a number of different clinics with all different patients, and they all present with different findings and different issues, but I think MyCode is an amazing project, and I think the work that we've done so far to identify different variants in patients and get that information out to families so they can inform their family members and friends to also join the project has been remarkable. I also help out with the DETECT project a little bit too, which has a similar motive, but I think the research aspect that Geisinger brings about to its patients and to offer their patients in order to benefit their health and their lives has been wonderful.
Dr. Bellis?
Yeah, so you know, as a as a biologist starting out, you know, the goal was always to understand, you know, how does life work? What makes something alive? What makes, you know, when you apply that to medicine, what makes somebody healthy? What makes somebody have a disease? And, you know, DNA is at the very core of that. And, you know, people say, you know, genetics, it's really complicated. And I say, well, it's just A's, C's, T's, and G's. They're just like computer people say, well, it's just zeros and ones, right? So it's what you do with those A's, C's, T's, and G's. But it really is the bedrock of biology. And, you know, I think, you know, medicine for a long time has kind of hovered up on here's a symptom and, you know, we try to treat it and, you know, it gets better, but, you know, we don't really understand what's going on. So here's an opportunity to really understand, you know, biology, disease, you know, at its very core. And it is, you know, this is what has got everybody excited, but, you know, implementing it is difficult because, you know, there's still so much that we don't know. You know, we worked so hard to get to, you know, 1,000 genomes, and now we want to get 1 million genomes, but there's 7 billion people, you know, on the planet. And, you know, and this is kind of the ideal little niche to do it because people do stay here. You know, there is stability here, and people are interested. And, you know, I think, you know, Geisinger has the chance to really lead the world, you know, in establishing, you know, genomic and precision medicine. So I just came here recently from Colorado, and I'm just happy to be part of it. Yeah.
Okay, we have questions coming in. Michael is asking, what are the qualifications for careers in genetics? And if some of this is repetitious, that's fine. Gabrielle?
Yeah, so some of the qualifications, at least from what I know from a genetic counseling perspective, genetic counseling, you need at least a bachelor's degree from an accredited institution, and then you go on to pursue a 2-year master's degree in genetic counseling. But I'm sure Mark and everyone else here can kind of portray more information about broader general careers in genetics as well.
Who would like to pick up? Dr. Williams?
Sure. So the simple answer is that really there is a career in genetics for anybody with any kind of a degree. So we have consenters that are working with our MyCode project that have high school diplomas. We have undergraduate degrees that are working as our genetic medicine assistants, and in some cases in some of our computer science and bioinformatics that are needed for analysis of the sequences. Master's genetic counselors, but also master's level researchers, PhDs, both in the research and the clinical and laboratory realm, and then medical degrees, MD-DO. And also very broad disciplines. We have within our research group involved in MyCode, we have anthropologists, and we have economists, and we have lawyers, and so we'll take anybody. That's what it comes down.
Even lawyers.
As long as you're interested in genetics and are willing to work on it.
Dr. Martin, anything to add?
No, I think Mark covered it well.
Okay. Stay there. David asks, at what point in your medical education and career did you decide to focus on genetics? I think some of you have probably answered this already. Was it something you always wanted to do even before completing medical school, or did the interest come later? If later, what triggered it?
So I think I answered that
Yeah,
in my
you covered,
first question,
yeah.
so maybe I'll pass it back to you, Mark.
Yeah, I think, everybody else has sort of said, well, this is something that I was really on top of right away. I was a chemistry major as an undergraduate because I didn't like hanging around with all the biology students. I thought they were kind of boring. And my dad was a chemist, and so we didn't, at that time, DNA and chemistry didn't, even though it is a chemical, it didn't really work together, so I didn't hear much about it. And so it was really, again, just sort of coming in contact with it from the patient perspective. What are the patients that really are the intellectual drivers for me? And when I saw that the majority of those were genetics patients, that's what really got my interest going in genetics. So I really came to it much later than I think many of the others.
Okay, stay there, Dr. Williams. Darlene asks, what medical technologist openings do you have in genetics?
I'm going to actually pass this to Dr. Martin, our laboratory geneticist.
Yeah, I would say that there are jobs for medical technologists that are more laboratory based. So having them in the lab doing the testing and helping with the interpretation of the results is where you'll find most medical technologists find a role in genetics or how they get into genetics.
As we start wrapping things up, we want to remind the folks out there that it is DNA Day. What message would you like to leave folks with today about the world of genetics?
Well, I can start. I always tell young people who are still in school why it's such a fun field. So I feel, and I think Mark alluded to this, it's changing every day. So a lot of medicine changes and things, but I do feel like genetics has such a broad reach across all areas of healthcare. And there's just new findings every day that are so relevant that it just doesn't get boring.
2 words, stay tuned.
Uh-huh. Good way to put it, Dr. Williams.
Well, I always say what I like about genetics and about clinical genetics, it's where science meets soap opera. So we see people with incredibly kind of complex, medical conditions, and we see them coming from all kinds of different social situations, and it's never boring. There's always something going on.
Mm-hmm.
I have to agree with Dr. Bellis.
Yeah.
I think that that's a big driver and something that drove me to the field as well. But I do think that genetics is important, and especially as I'm beginning my career, I've learned a lot about my own genetics and my own health of my family and myself. myself too, which has driven me to pursue what I would like to do. So I think that genetics is important, and happy DNA Day.
Okay, happy DNA Day. Well, thank you folks for being a part of this discussion today. And we just want to mention too, that if you have any questions after our discussion, just message us and we're going to do our very best with our experts here to get them answered. But that's going to wrap it up today for Geisinger's discussion on DNA Day. And it's a big day because it's the 15th anniversary. And we thank you for watching and taking part as well.